In today's climate, it's impossible to ignore the cybersecurity threats in the world, and threats to the defense supply chain continue to increase both in numbers and complexity. This risk involves sensitive information, not only in government systems, but also in systems operated by contractors that develop and deliver products, services, and solutions to the federal government and throughout every link of the global supply chain. It is essential for organizations to be able to identify and manage these risks by following the regulations and standards that have been established to protect sensitive information. To understand how the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC, program came to exist, we first need to identify what's at stake. In this topic, we're going to discuss the cybersecurity threats the Department of Defense faces and identify the regulatory responses the United States government has made in response to those threats. Let's define some basic terms. The Defense Industrial Base, or DIB, is the complex system of the more than 100,000 contractors that support the United States military. These contractors research, develop, design, produce, deliver, and maintain the weapons necessary to support U.S. military requirements. The DIB is actually part of the larger defense supply chain, which includes every business that supports the military. For example, it includes companies that supply office equipment, food, and janitorial services. The DIB is quite vast. It spans the globe and includes large companies dedicated to building things like jets and tanks, down all the way to the mom-and-pop small businesses who build the individual components of those jets and tanks. Basically, our modern weapons systems require years of effort to manage and field, which in turn requires an army of defense contractors who are called the DIB. Let's use the F-35 as our example to explain the complexity of modern weapons systems and how vast the DIB really is. F-35 production takes years, and it involves 1,400 plus suppliers across 45 states and Puerto Rico, as well as suppliers from other countries. In addition, you have to think about all the different support systems that are required to keep a single F-35 flying. That includes fuel suppliers, maintenance companies, the companies that build runways and ships, the companies that create the simulators that are used to train people, the air traffic control equipment, the communications equipment, and munitions. These are all built by different companies whose supply chains must work together seamlessly to achieve their military mission. Cybersecurity attacks have led the DoD to raise their expectations for supply chain contractors and the creation of the CMMC program. Our adversaries are extremely interested in our technology for three primary reasons. One, they can learn our capabilities to figure out how to defeat us. Two, if they can steal our technology, they do not have to invest the time and money in their own R&D efforts. Finally, stealing our technology allows them to minimize the time that the United States has military technological superiority, since they can get the weapon in the field faster. Our adversaries steal intellectual property from our supply chain since it's most likely easier to hack into a defense contractor, or one of their subcontractors, than it is to hack into the DoD itself. Any given contractor might only have a portion of a blueprint, but if the enemy can steal enough portions from multiple contractors, they can put the pieces together like a puzzle. The DoD actually has limited visibility to the complex hierarchy of DIB contractors. Of course, they are aware of the prime contractors, the ones that receive contracts directly from the government. But past that point, the DoD has limited visibility on how those primes take specific portions of those contracts and award them to various subcontractors via an arrangement that's called a teaming agreement. The complexity of the contractor hierarchy means that the DoD has limited knowledge of how their sensitive information flows down through it, and therefore they can't adequately monitor the risks. Like a secret, the more people who have access to the data, the more vulnerable it is to exposure. For example, F-35 prime contractors might share sensitive information with a subcontractor to be able to build the engine. They might share things like performance characteristics and integration details covering how to build the jet, or schedule information, which highlights when the jet will be operational. All this data is technically unclassified, but it is sensitive. It's very valuable to our adversaries, and it needs to be protected. As a side note, in this course, we're going to use the term sensitive information to refer to any information that regulations require you to protect. In the next topic, we will define some more specific terms and discuss their distinct levels of required protections. Complex flows of information put that information at risk. The annual estimated loss of intellectual property from the United States is $600 billion, including losses from both the government and businesses. That's $600 billion with a B lost every year. All that loss of the DoD's intellectual property puts our warfighters' lives in danger because we don't retain any military superiority, and it diminishes our global competitive advantage. This is why CMMC is so important. Let's take a look at a specific case study of stolen information. The F-35, built by the United States, is a fifth-generation strike fighter aircraft that is stealthy. It's a very high-tech platform from sensor to shooter, and it costs about $94 to $122 million to build each jet. In addition, it costs $1.5 trillion over the course of a 55-year lifespan. The United States has put a lot of money into creating and maintaining these jets with the intent of providing our warfighters with an advantage in the field. Now let's take a look at the Chinese J-31. China stole pieces of F-35 data from multiple U.S. contractors and put the puzzle together. We know that they stole information from the United States because a small flaw that appears in the F-35 also appears in the J-31, which could only happen with stolen data. This theft allowed China to save time and money on research and development. They didn't have to do it themselves, which allowed them to get a prototype sooner. In addition to diminishing our technological superiority, that monetary savings can also be used to further hurt U.S. businesses because it can drive down commodity prices. Now that we know how much data losses cost the U.S. government, we have the context for the philosophical changes that are driving the creation of the CMMC program. The DoD has increased their expectations for accountability and integrity about cybersecurity. To expect contractors to be accountable for the sensitive information that they've been given, and for them to treat it with integrity is a reasonable ask. Previously, the DoD was trusting contractors' self-attestations that they were secure and using plans of action to fix any cybersecurity gaps. Moving forward, the DoD is shifting towards requiring independent validation of the DIB's compliance with cybersecurity regulations. This shift in thinking requires transparency between some traditionally isolated entities. This change also means changing expectations for IT teams. It requires a shift from a protect the system mindset to a protect the information mindset. This new perspective requires companies to know where sensitive information enters their company, which systems, people, and processes it flows through while it's there, where it's stored, and how it is shared with others outside the company. That information-centric view helps organizations achieve strong cybersecurity in a more cost-effective manner, or at least in a manner that is more consistent with the risk. There has been a long-standing desire to not spend more than you need to protect your system. But the information-centric approach helps companies understand where the crown jewels are, and then to protect them appropriately without having to invest in equal protections for every system. That brings us to the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program. CMMC is a DoD initiative to confirm defense contractors' cybersecurity preparedness and effectiveness. It's a trust but verify program. The goal of CMMC is to standardize cybersecurity implementation across the DIB. It utilizes existing cybersecurity standards and adds an independent assessment conducted by a trained assessor. It consists of several levels designed to fit the different types of sensitive information. The program focuses on promoting overall cybersecurity maturity. Essentially, the CMMC program is designed to provide the DoD with an assurance that the DIB can protect sensitive information within its complex supply chain, because the program also accounts for the information flow down to subcontractors. Let's take a brief look at the history of the CMMC program. In 2019, the CMMC program was kicked off with the DoD working in partnership with industry to create the model. In 2020, the DoD published an interim rule about the inclusion of CMMC in contracts, released the model, and began working with industry to create the structure for training and managing the independent assessors. In March of 2021, there was a pause while the DoD did an internal review after receiving more than 850 public comments on the interim rule. That review led to version 2.0 of the model, released in November 2021. At the same time, the DoD also instituted the rulemaking process to finalize the program, which takes somewhere between 9 and 24 months. The details about how the program will be rolled out aren't yet public, but we know that after rulemaking, final solicitations for DoD contracts will include a requirement for a CMMC certification in order for companies to be able to bid on a contract. Rulemaking is a complex process that takes a long time. CMMC version 2.0 was released to the public in November of 2021, which triggered the start of new rulemaking efforts. DoD is pursuing 2 different rules in 2 different federal regulations. The rule in 32 CFR will implement the framework of CMMC as a defense program. The rule in 48 CFR is an update to the CMMC interim rule, and it formalizes the inclusion of CMMC requirements in contracts. Both rules must have a congressional review and a public comment period for stakeholder input before they will be finalized. The rulemaking process was expected to take 9 to 24 months from that November 2021 date. Within that window, in July of 2023, the DoD submitted the rule to the Office of Management and Budget for review, after which it will be officially published in the Federal Register. At that point, there will be a public comment period. The DoD will adjudicate those comments and the rule will be finalized. What should DIB contractors be doing in the interim while rulemaking is ongoing? During the rulemaking timeframe, the CMMC requirement cannot be included in DoD solicitations, and some pilot programs were suspended. However, DIB contractors need to remember that CMMC is just an external verification of cybersecurity requirements already in place. DIB organizations have been encouraged to continue to work to strengthen their cybersecurity practices. The DoD has provided some resources, such as Project Spectrum, to help contractors assess and build their cybersecurity practices. The DoD is also considering incentives to companies who participate in the Joint Voluntary Surveillance Program, which involves an assessment conducted by the government in conjunction with an authorized CMMC third-party assessment organization. The intent is that those voluntary assessments will be grandfathered in as CMMC Level 2 assessments once rulemaking is final. Basically, the key message about the rulemaking period is that contractors need to continue to build their cybersecurity resilience. They need to comply with the NIST 800-171 controls under the DFARS 252.204-7012 clause already in their contracts, which has been the case since 2017. The CMMC program is only creating a verification program for that compliance requirement. From a cultural perspective, CMMC is about recognizing the crucial role contractors play in the defense supply chain and protecting our nation's critical assets. It also drives home the mission-critical role cybersecurity plays in those contractors' abilities to continue conducting business with the government. In the end, CMMC is forcing senior management to get involved in cybersecurity, which many have run from in the past. This means crafting policies that don't prevent the organization from doing business while still meeting DoD requirements, ensuring adequate resources are available to protect the organization, and building strong governance programs to oversee the execution of the plan. The goal is that cybersecurity will be ingrained into the overall culture of the organization and will become a decision-making factor, just like financial and other controls. It needs to be resourced as a priority and built into governance structures. Protection of sensitive information needs to become the baseline for contract eligibility, which will make cybersecurity a foundational part of decision-making in defense acquisition. Deliverable quality and other performance indicators are really only effective when the information is secure. If you create a high-quality jet, but the blueprints get stolen from you, then it's not a military advantage anymore. How does the DoD mandate a cultural shift? Through regulations and policies, which flow from laws. In the case of CMMC, the critical legal driver is FISMA, which stands for the Federal Information Security Management Act, passed in 2002 and updated in 2014. It required executive agencies to plan for security based on risk impact levels. Legislation is interpreted and implemented through regulations located in the Code of Federal Regulations, which contains all the general and permanent rules published in the Federal Register. It is divided into 50 sections called titles. In the case of the CMMC program, the regulations live in 2 sections of the CFR. Title 32, which contains regulations pertaining to national defense and security, and Title 48, which contains regulations about federal acquisitions. Finally, at the most detailed level, regulations are implemented through policies. Chapter 1 of Title 48 of the Code of Federal Regulations is called the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or FAR. It documents the rules that government contractors are subject to. It is often called 48 CFR. It provides uniform policies and procedures that apply to all executive branch departments and agencies regarding acquisitions, which is anything that the government purchases or leases. DIB companies need to have some familiarity with the FAR. It takes priority over the supplements from individual agencies like the DoD. It provides a consistent set of baseline requirements that apply to all solicitations across the United States federal government. 48 CFR 52.204-21, which is commonly called FAR 52, is titled Basic Safeguarding of Covered Contractor Information Systems. It is the regulation that defines how contractors need to protect federal contract information. It includes the definitions you need to know to understand the regulations and details the requirements and procedures contractors must undertake to safeguard federal contract information. The requirements included in FAR 52 are embedded into the CMMC program as Level 1. FAR 52 also defines the responsibilities of contractors when they delegate contract work to a subcontractor. In summary, FAR 52 is the bare minimum in cybersecurity that the federal government expects from anyone who contracts with it. The FAR is for the entire federal government, and then there are supplements for each agency within the executive branch. The Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, which is often called the DFARS, includes acquisition policies and procedures that only apply to the DoD. DIB organizations need to be very familiar with the specific clauses in their own contracts. They are often incorporated by reference, not included in full text in the contract. So DIB contractors need to look up the details to know their responsibilities. Now let's talk about the DFARS clauses specifically related to CMMC. There are 4 of them. The clause number 252.204-7012 was introduced in 2017. I'm going to shorthand these by just referring to the final 4 numbers, in this case 7012. This DFARS clause covers how contractors need to protect CUI by implementing the controls from a document called NIST Special Publication 800-171. It also includes responsibilities for contractors to rapidly report cyber incidents and to flow down the clause in its entirety to any subcontractors. Looking at the blue text, 7012 is a global self-attestation by contract signature, which means that when the contract is signed, the contractor agrees to do all these things. The DoD trusted that contractors were complying, but audit sampling found that they weren't. So, in November of 2020, 3 different DFARS clauses came out to move towards a trust but verify system. The 7019 clause requires contractors to provide a more detailed self-attestation. Contractors must complete a self-assessment and report a score of their compliance. The 7020 clause details how the Defense Contract Management Agency, DCMA, can conduct audits of DIB organizations to assess their cybersecurity posture. The 7021 clause creates the CMMC program, which is a tiered system of assessment requirements based on the sensitivity of the information. NIST has been mentioned a few times, but you may or may not be familiar with it. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a large, non-regulatory agency that provides numerous publications covering technological standards on all kinds of things, including the ones that are pertinent to CMMC. There are 2 NIST documents that are critical for you to be familiar with. The NIST Special Publication numbered 800-171 is titled Protecting Controlled Unclassified Information in Non-Federal Systems and Organizations. That document is what all federal contractors, not just those working for the DoD, are required to utilize to protect the confidentiality of the government's sensitive information. It does not cover other aspects of cybersecurity, such as integrity or availability. In this course, we'll refer to this often as simply 171. 171 has a related publication that is critical for understanding what it is that companies are required to do to protect CUI. That document is numbered 171A and provides the procedures for assessing compliance with the requirements in 171. Unfortunately, having 2 separate documents has led to many companies believing they were complying when in fact government audits determined they were not. The CMMC assessment guides combine 171 and 171A into a single document. NIST is in the process of revising 171 and 171A. In May of 2023, the initial draft for Rev 3 was released. People were given time for public feedback, which NIST will adjudicate. NIST will then issue a second draft, accept public comments, and then we'll release the final draft. The timeline for when this will impact the CMMC program is unknown, but eventually the CMMC program will be assessing organizations against Rev 3. If you are just starting this process, you should focus on compliance with Rev 2 and just keep an eye on Rev 3 for longer-term planning purposes. Now that you have a sense of the regulations driving CMMC, how can you determine what regulations apply to you? The first thing is look at your organization's contracts with the DoD or the subcontracts that you have from a prime. If the contract mentions 48 CFR, then you are required to protect FCI, which we'll define more specifically in the next topic. If you have Clause 252.204-7012, that means that you are required to protect CUI, also to be defined in the next topic, which means following NIST 171. At this point in time, you're not going to have the 252.204-7021 clause that requires a CMMC certification in order to bid on the contract, but that is what is coming.